when you do have a contract with a system integrator, do you grant that authorization to the system integrator, or are you granting it to the actual cloud provider? And if you look at FedRAMP, you're looking at system owners. You're looking at it as a system itself. And so when we have authorization packages come in and we validate them through the program management office, we look to make sure who the actual system owner is. Whether if it's a system integrator, you're not the system owner. You're not the person ultimately responsible. In each control, it states who is the responsible party for that and who is the system owner at the very top of that package. We make sure we look at it from that perspective because, to your point, you want to make sure who's responsible and who are you trusting to do that, the implementation of that controller or providing that security. And I think what we're trying to do with FedRAMP is really make sure that, as we've seen, some government systems aren't always secure, right? And we want to make sure everything that we're doing is secure. With FedRAMP, what you can see is that system that you want to use. You can see every single control that has some sort of implementation, how it's been addressed, and how that cloud provider is doing it. That doesn't mean, and Michaela will get into some of the other stuff related to it, doesn't mean that the agency's responsibilities are taken care of. What it does mean is that cloud provider, they have documented everything that they do. They literally can't do it again because they've gone through and documented all 325 controls, how they address it and how they've implemented it. And there's an independent assessor that goes out and analyzes that and looks and finds out if they actually implement as stated and gives the results of any risks on that system. And so I think that's really important to sort of build that trust model with FedRAMP and going to the cloud, because it does allow agencies to actually fully understand what a provider's doing. We get a lot of criticism for the fact that the documentation is hard, and many of the providers in the room that I've worked with will continue to tell me that it's the hardest thing they've done in terms of a compliance effort, and it's a beast to get through all the documentation. And I will not negate that fact. It is true, but in order to build that trust and be able to outsource that sort of trust framework and have your data be in another person's environment, you really have to understand what a cloud provider is doing. And there's no other way to trust that than to fully have everything that they're doing documented. It's not like you can sit across this table at breakfast and we have a great conversation about you're the cloud provider and you do this security. You know what? I got the warm and fuzzy. I'm now going to put my mission critical apps in there. Doesn't work that way. You really need to understand what they're doing and what that system actually has going on with all of their implementations, because cloud providers do it differently. And if you don't have that information, you can't fully trust it. And so I think that's one of the things we really focus on with FedRAMP, is really making sure that rigor of security does not fall at all. Because obviously right now, Tony Scott's been talking about that cyber is his #1 priority. There's nothing that we can do within FedRAMP to lower the bar of security, making sure agencies can understand what the security is of those cloud systems. Otherwise, we're going to get into issues where you can't trust the cloud, and that'll really derail all the progress that we've made to date with it. So I think that's one of the things that we just really focus on in FedRAMP, is making sure that rigor maintains a high level, because even though we would like it to go faster at sometimes, if we trade rigor for speed, then we're going to get into a big mess with security and being able to trust these cloud providers. So I think that's something that is really sort of important to remember with FedRAMP as we go forward, and some of the criticisms that we get of sort of the speed to getting through the process. If we want to be able to trust it and not have any major issues, you really have to go through and document everything and go through the process as is. Agencies do have their own responsibilities once you use the cloud service provider. That's not like FedRAMP is the silver bullet. It's a silver bullet for that cloud service provider, but it's not a silver bullet for the end user in that agency, right? That means the cloud service provider's implementations have been proven. But if you look through the documentation and look through the templates for FedRAMP, it describes the responsibilities for controls. And even in the descriptions, it'll say, what are the customer responsibilities? And so what Michaela's really working on, in my sort of layman's term, Michaela's much smarter than me, but sort of taking that customer responsibility and really defining for agency customers what they actually need to do to complete that total security package, right? So if I'm looking at the system from a cloud perspective, even if it's just the infrastructure, or even if we go all the way up to the software, there's still a layer up top that agencies are always going to have to do, and there's an entire layer down the side for every control, or almost every control, that an agency is going to have to consider and or actually do something for. And so Michaela's really working on creating that overall framework so that when agencies come and leverage what we have, we clearly define what a cloud provider is doing and clearly define for agencies where they need to be doing things too. Most agencies actually see that within the FedRAMP cloud, you're actually addressing all 325 controls. And it's one of those where I think our team has had a lot of conversations with agencies when they don't trust necessarily the cloud, is we go back and say, so go to your data center and see if you're implementing all those controls. Did you actually document all those controls that you said that you're doing, or that you're saying that this cloud provider isn't doing enough for you? Are you actually doing all of that? And they just sort of kind of giggle and look away and then say, all right, gotcha. So I think it's really important to know that is, even though there are some thoughts to doing controls above, vastly what you're seeing across the government is the realization that they've had a chance to input into those baselines. It is a lot of controls, I won't deny that either, but you are actually going through and doing all of those controls, whereas agencies haven't been doing all those controls themselves and realizing they're getting better security many times, the cloud providers that have gone through FedRAMP, than with their services that they actually have in-house already, if it's at the same level of security. Most cloud providers, they haven't made their business doing systems integration. That's not how they make their money. They make their money providing the services. They don't make their money by going to each individual customer and understanding what their needs are and how to use the service. They just want to provide that service. That's how they built their business. So systems integrators are actually, I think, a very powerful tool in moving to cloud for agencies. I think you have to structure it appropriately so you deal with the liability issues that you have major concerns with. So how to contract with systems integrators, with cloud providers is important, but I think they're a very valuable place in the market because I think there is a gap in a lot of the personnel in the government of truly understanding how to move to the government. Even sometimes in understanding how to consume security from a cloud provider and integrating that with the security you've already built in. So I think there's a really powerful place there for industry to really help government move to cloud more effectively within that space of being able to really understand what the government needs and that specific agency and that specific customer needs to be able to then effectively use that cloud provider and have that cloud provider system effectively interact with their legacy systems as well. So I think it's a really interesting space for a lot of people. It's not providing the services, it's actually really effectively helping the government functionally use that and interact across the sort of hybrid environment between using 3 different clouds for different types of services and having your back-end services still provided in your traditional data centers. If an agency wanted to buy a data center, if someone bid for that data center, you couldn't say that you were FISMA certified before the agency bought it. One thing that FedRAMP provides is that you can actually say that before you bid, but right now what you're looking at is you're having cloud providers say that they can do this, but they need someone to go through the process with them. You can't, it's a chicken and the egg situation. Cloud providers are saying, I want to do this, I want to be able to provide the security, but I haven't been able to prove it yet because I don't have an agency customer. And most agencies will not work with a cloud provider until they're under contract with them. So to say that you can't bid unless you have FedRAMP many times is actually going to limit your competition because there's 38, I think, right now, cloud providers. I should have looked that up before I got on stage, I know. But there's about roughly 40 cloud providers right now. If you're looking at basic infrastructure, there's a competitive range. So you could probably limit it there. But if you're looking at platforms and softwares, there's not a competitive range. And guess what? In the government, if you want to do something and limit your procurement, you need to be able to prove there's a competitive range. Otherwise, you have to justify doing limited source justification, I'm forgetting my procurement language. But sole source, thank you. That was those other words I was looking for. But you need to be able to provide, to say that you are actually having a competitive range of providers that can offer these services to you. And so what we're trying to clarify right now is that for cloud providers or for agencies, yes, you should be requiring FedRAMP. That doesn't mean you should be requiring it at time of bid or necessarily even at time of award. FedRAMP should be proven by the time you go operational. By the time that you put data into that system, you need to go through the authorization process and you need to build that into your timeline for implementations. So working through with your vendors what that looks like. So having a management plan or a management portion of your contract that says security is this. What's your approach, contractor, to getting through FedRAMP if you're not already? And so looking for our providers is, it's not that you need to have FedRAMP at time of award. They need to be meeting FedRAMP by the time an agency puts data in there. But if agencies limit it before even an award, then you're basically saying the 40 providers we have now are the 40 providers we will have for the eternity of FedRAMP. And that's not good for agencies, and it's not good for industry either.